Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. Story 1, The Vanishing K9 Handler. They still hear the dog barking, not in person, never that, but through the static of their patrol radios. Always late at night, always near that godforsaken motel just off County Route 6. They've tried to trace the signal, run diagnostics, even replace the radios themselves. But the barks keep returning. Low, guttural, panicked, like the dogs trapped in a nightmare it can't wake from. Sergeant Cole Branson had been on the force for over 17 years. Decorated, clean record. He was the type who still ironed his uniform every morning and brushed his K9's fur like it was his own child. The department had paired him with Diesel, a massive black German shepherd with amber eyes that saw through walls of fear. They were the best team in the state, until they entered that motel. It was supposed to be a routine bust. Just a tip about a suspected meth cook holdup in room 108 of the Hollow Pines Motel. A decrepit, half-condemned structure with rotting stairs and flickering signage that buzzed like an insect hive. Branson and Diesel went in first. Dispatch lost contact at 9:42 p.m. The rest of the team arrived at 9:58 p.m. Room 108 was empty. No sign of Branson. No sign of Diesel. Blood on the floor, not fresh, not even warm. More like it had been there for decades. Dark, dry, cracked like paint. The walls were covered in mold and something else. Something wrong. Carvings. Symbols no one could identify. Deep grooves etched by fingernails or worse. And then the howling started. No one wanted to admit it, but every officer that's been near Hollow Pines since that night hears something. Not every time, but often enough that rumors started. Barking in the static. Footsteps echoing from empty halls. Some say they've seen a shadow with glowing eyes in the hallway mirror. Some even reported dreams, vivid, repeating nightmares of being locked in room 108, unable to scream, only bark. The chief declared the motel off limits, boarded up. Patrols were warned to stay away, but the barks haven't stopped. Tonight, Officer Mason Carter is going in. He's the only one who doesn't believe the ghost stories, radio glitches, hallucinations, group paranoia, he said in the briefing. He volunteered to investigate, unofficially, said he had a plan. Said he wanted to lay it all to rest. He strapped on a body cam. Took only one partner, a rookie named Danvers, fresh from academy, and a brand new K9, Titan. They signed out at 11:04 p.m., and as they drove off into the night, the last thing heard over the radio wasn't their voices. It was Diesel, barking, calling for help. The wind had picked up as Officer Mason Carter and Rookie Danvers pulled off the main road, the headlights catching the Hollow Pines Motel like a half-dead thing blinking in the dark. Its weather-warped siding peeled like scabs under yellowed floodlights that flickered against the black sky. The vacancy sign buzzed with a failing rhythm, dimming and then flaring as if reacting to their arrival. Mason cut the engine. Silence swallowed the cruiser. Still sure about this? Danvers asked, trying to sound confident but failing. He had the look of a man trying to remember every self-defense move he learned in training. Titan, the new K9, sat poised in the back seat, ears up, tail still, not even a twitch. The dog was alert, too alert. Mason exhaled. We're just checking it out. No ghosts, no demons, just a rundown building with bad wiring. He popped the door and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. Titan followed without a sound, padding forward like he knew the way. Danvers trailed behind, flashlight already on, beam jittering across the overgrown parking lot. They crossed under the half-fallen canopy, the faded sign above them barely legible. HLLWPI Tel. As Mason pushed open the front door, it gave way with a groan loud enough to startle birds from nearby trees. Inside, the air was thick, not dusty, just heavy, like walking into a basement after a flood. The lobby was trashed, furniture overturned, glass cracked, mold creeping up a wallpaper in slow tendrils. The reception desk was smashed, the bell dented and rusted. Danvers whispered, "This place is a tomb." "No talking," Mason said, voice low. "Just listen." He reached for the body cam on his vest, tapped it once. The green light blinked on. Titan stopped at the hallway's threshold, hackles raised, emitting a low growl that reverberated in Mason's chest. The hallway led to the guest rooms, 10 on the left, 10 on the right. Room 108 was down at the far end. "Easy," Mason murmured to the dog. "It's just a building." But Titan wouldn't move, not until a noise echoed from deep within the hallway. A bark, one short, sharp bark. Not Titan, not any living dog. It came through the walls, distant, warped like a tape played too slowly. Danvers froze. "Did you hear that?" Mason nodded but said nothing. He moved forward slowly, Titan finally following, ears twitching. Danvers stepped in last, and the door behind him creaked closed. They passed room 101, then 103. Each door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Rock clung to the doorknobs. Some had scratches near the base. Deep ones, like claws. The closer they got to 108, the colder it became. Breath began to fog in the air. Titan whimpered now, each step reluctant, every muscle tight with dread. Room 108 stood out before they reached it. Its door was slightly ajar. Inside was dark, utterly dark. Mason touched the knob. Ice cold. The door opened slowly with a whisper. They entered. The body cam footage would later show only fragments, shaky images, quick flashes of what could be blood or old paint, symbols on the walls, unfamiliar, circular, complex, and then movement. Something in the corner, a hunched figure, no face, no sound. Titan lunged, barking ferociously. The flashlight danced wildly, illuminating the figure for only a split second. A man in uniform, unmoving. Diesel's uniform. Danvers screamed. The lights went out. In the blackness, Mason shouted, "Danvers!" Titan. No answer. Only static. His radio hissed, squealed, and then, "Room 108, stay out." The voice was his own, recorded from earlier, coming from the wrong end. He turned. Titan was gone. Danvers was gone. And he wasn't in room 108 anymore. The walls changed. They pulsed like lungs. The symbols twisted, rearranged themselves into something familiar. Letters, words. He never left. Mason backed into the wall, heart hammering. The hallway was different now, elongated impossibly so. Every door was 108. The ceiling stretched upward into shadow. He ran, flashlight flickering. Each door he passed whispered. Some creaked open, revealing dark, featureless rooms where barking echoed endlessly. He grabbed a doorknob, hot now, scalding his hand. He yanked it open. Inside he saw himself, or what was left of himself, a twisted mirror image, drenched in blood, wearing his badge, holding his gun, smiling. "End of the line," it whispered, stepping forward. Mason turned and ran. Behind him, the barks returned, louder, clearer. Diesel's bark, and another, Titan's. He followed the sound down the corridor of repeating 108s until he saw the stairwell, the basement. He knew what every cop had said. There was no basement. The motel was single level, had always been, but tonight there were stairs, and they were wet. The stairs weren't supposed to exist. They spiraled downward into darkness, soaked with something thicker than water. Mason stepped carefully, the air growing colder with each level. The light from his flashlight barely pierced the blackness. His boots squelched against wet cement. The barks were louder now. 2 sets, sometimes overlapping, sometimes echoing in opposite directions. He was going deeper than the motel's foundation should have allowed. The walls pulsed again, flesh-like. The deeper he went, the more the motel's architecture turned wrong. Doorways narrowed. Ceilings sagged like stretched skin. Graffiti shifted with every glance. Symbols crawling across the walls like insects. When Mason reached the bottom, the hallway had no end. Just a single flickering red bulb overhead. And a door at the far end, charred black with rusted hinges. No number. No handle. Just a dead bolt. He moved forward, every instinct telling him to turn back. But the barks, they were behind that door now. Clear, urgent, a low growl. Titan was still alive. He had to be. He unlatched the bolt. The door swung open into pitch black. He stepped inside. The room wasn't a room. It was a memory. Flickering images surrounded him like old home videos projected into the air. Police tape. Diesel barking at a door. Branson yelling commands. A suspect screaming in a voice not human. Then silence. A replay. Branson entered the motel room. Diesel followed. The suspect turned. He wasn't a man. Not anymore. His eyes were black. His mouth too wide. He said something in a language that sounded like chewing glass. The door slammed. The footage ended. Mason stood alone in the dark. He looked down. His body cam was still recording, but the green light had turned red. A hum began, low and deep, like a distant siren. The walls started closing in. He ran. The room stretched again, reshaping itself, walls folding like origami, floors becoming ceilings. Doors appeared and vanished. Each one was room 108. One door open on its own. Inside was a morgue. Stainless steel. Cold. Diesel lay on the slab. Lifeless, but his chest rose once, then twice, then stopped. Another bark. Mason spun. Titan appeared at the far end of the room, snarling at the shadows. His eyes glowed. His fur stood on end. Titan, come. Titan barked once and bolted. Into the dark. Mason chased him, the hallway narrowing again until he was crawling on his hands and knees. The air was thick with dust and rot. Something brushed past his cheek. Fingers. Cold, wet fingers. He gasped and crawled faster. The tunnel opened suddenly into a circular chamber. Walls covered in handprints. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some smeared in blood. Some blackened with ash. Titan was there, standing still, growling. Across the room stood Branson. He looked intact, alive, but his badge was missing. His eyes were blank, and in his hand he held a leash with no dog. "You came," Branson said flatly. "They always come." Mason stepped forward slowly. "Branson, what happened here?" "This place is hungry," he whispered. "It feeds on guilt, on fear, on memories you try to bury." Branson looked up. Diesel fought it. "I try to help him, but you can't help something that doesn't want saving." Behind Branson, a figure appeared, hulking, shadowed, stitched together from parts that didn't belong. Its limbs twitched. Its mouth opened wider than its skull should allow. Branson didn't flinch. "This is what's left of the motel." The figure stepped forward. Titan growled louder. Mason aimed his weapon. "Back off." Branson smiled. "It's already inside you." Suddenly, the shadows exploded outward. Mason fired blindly, the gunshots deafening. Titan lunged. The chamber pulsed. The handprints began moving, reaching out, grabbing. Mason screamed. Everything turned red. He woke up in room 108, just as it had been when they first entered. Pristine. Normal. The sunlight glowed through broken blinds. The air was calm. Danvers sat on the floor, dazed. Titan lay beside him, unharmed. Mason stood up. His vest was gone. His body cam, crushed. His radio, hissing. "Dispatch," he called out. Static. Then a voice. "Officer Branson requesting backup. Room 108. Suspect resisting." It was an old recording. A loop. Titan growled, low and unsure. Mason looked down at the floor. Blood seeped from the walls again. The handprints were back. Danvers whispered, "I think we're still inside." Mason didn't answer, because the barking had started again, from the other side of the mirror, and it wasn't Diesel. It was him. Mason didn't know how long he'd been staring at the mirror. The glass didn't reflect him anymore. It shimmered like water, rippling in time with the barks that echoed behind it. Titan growled low beside him, his body tense, ears locked forward. Danvers stayed silent, pressing his back to the wall, mouthing something under his breath, a prayer or a desperate plea. The motel had gone still again, eerily still, but something had changed. The walls weren't bleeding now. They were breathing, slow, deliberate inhales, as if the building had come alive, conscious, waiting. Mason reached toward the mirror. His fingertips met ice, then warmth, then nothing at all. His hand passed through, vanishing up to the wrist. The mirror swallowed him like fog. Danvers shouted, "Mason, don't!" Too late. The mirror pulled. Titan lunged after him, and they both disappeared into glass, the motel room blinking out like the last second of a nightmare. And on the other side, silence, darkness, but not the same darkness. This was deeper, heavier, thick with grief, with memory. The motel didn't echo here. There were no rooms, no stairs, no walls, just a void stitched together by broken sirens, distorted dispatch calls, and muffled canine cries. And then color. A dim, red light began to pulse in the distance. Titan led, his body moving slowly, sniffing the air, his growl low but steady. Mason followed. The light grew brighter as they approached, revealing a hallway, but this one was unlike anything Mason had seen before. It wasn't built. It was formed. Veins ran to the ceiling like wires. The walls throbbed with heat. The floor squelched beneath their steps, coated in a dark, viscous fluid that smelled like rust and meat. At the end of the hallway stood a door, and on that door, nailed like an offering, was Branson's badge. Titan barked once. The badge pulsed. Mason stepped forward, every fiber of his being screaming to stop, to run, to wake up. But there was no waking up from this place. Not anymore. He opened the door. Inside was a chamber, circular, familiar, the same one he'd seen before, but altered. Now it was filled with mirrors, dozens of them, lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Each reflected a different moment, not from life, not from dreams, from memories, dark ones. Mason saw himself as a rookie, frozen in fear during his first gunfight. He saw a victim he hadn't saved, a girl with lifeless eyes staring up from a bathtub. He saw Branson, soaked in sweat, whispering to Diesel in the back of a patrol car. He saw Titan, growling at a suspect Mason never questioned enough. Every mirror showed guilt. Every reflection whispered blame. Then, one by one, the mirrors shattered, and from the shards crawled hands, dozens of them, bloody, broken, dragging themselves across the floor like wounded animals. They weren't connected to bodies. They were memories given form. And they were reaching for him. Mason turned to run. The door had vanished. Titan barked furiously, trying to keep the crawling hands back. And in the center of the room, rising from the floor, came something new. A cage. Inside it, Diesel, or what was left of him. The dog's body was scarred, stitched, malformed. His eyes glowed blue with something that wasn't life. He stood motionless, growling not at Mason, but at something behind him. Mason turned. Branson, no longer a man, his body now misshapen, limbs elongated, spine twisted, mouth permanently torn into a smile too wide for human face. "You made it," the thing said, voice layered with static. Mason raised his weapon, trembling. "You're not Branson." "No," the thing replied. "I'm what's left when guilt festers, when memory never fades, when a place becomes too haunted to forget." It stepped forward. Titan snarled but hesitated. "Why the dogs?" Mason asked. "They remember," it said. "They never forget the cries, the smells, the evil. And this place, it loves them for that, feeds off their loyalty, their suffering." Mason clenched his jaw. "Let them go." "You still don't understand," it whispered. "You're already part of this. Room 108 took you the second you stepped inside, and now it wants to keep you." Suddenly, the walls trembled. The mirrors reformed, all reflecting the same image now. Mason, alone, trapped. A door appeared behind the creature, a way out, but the cage remained. Titan whined. Mason looked between the exit and the cage. Diesel growled faintly, his eyes locking with Mason's. He had to choose. The door began closing. Titan barked once, loud, demanding. Mason moved. He ran past the creature, dodging grasping hands, and slammed his shoulder into the cage. It didn't budge. The thing laughed. There is no saving him. Mason reached into his vest, pulled out the flare from earlier. He lit it. Flames burst, red and bright. He slammed the flare into the cage's lock. Metal hissed, melted. Diesel bolted out, teeth bared, charging the creature. Titan followed. The room exploded in snarls, growls, and chaos. Mirrors shattered again. The floor cracked open. The hand screamed. Mason turned toward the exit. It was closing fast. He ran. He crashed through the door, the air ripping around him like wind through a collapsing tunnel. Suddenly, he was back in the motel room. Room 108. Titan beside him. Diesel, bleeding but alive, limp against his side. Danvers stared at them, pale, trembling. What the hell just happened? Mason couldn't answer. He dropped to his knees, holding both dogs close, trying to breathe. The room was still, but the mirror was gone. In its place, blank wall, just drywall. The motel creaked gently, as if exhaling. And then came the final whisper, crawling from the radio on the floor. Room 108 cleared, awaiting the next. Mason looked at the wall. It wasn't over. Not really. The motel was still alive, and it was still hungry. 3 days later, Mason sat in the precinct locker room, staring at the duffel bag in front of him. It was zipped tight. Inside, his badge, his uniform, his sidearm. He hadn't touched them since he came back. Titan lay at his feet, silent. The vet said the dog had no physical injuries, but Mason could tell something was broken inside him. His eyes didn't track the same. His body flinched at sounds that hadn't happened. And Diesel hadn't made it through the night. Branson's partner, the one who had once been a pride of the unit, died in his sleep. No wounds, no poison, no trauma. His body was whole. His soul was not. The department listed it as cardiac failure. But Mason knew better. Danvers had refused to speak since they returned from the motel. He'd gone on leave, citing stress, locking himself in his house and refusing to answer calls. Mason had been called in by the chief twice. Both times he'd said the same thing. It was a false lead. We found nothing. The dogs triggered on old residue. But the motel, room 108, it still stood. Untouched. Condemned, yes, but untouched. They didn't tear it down. The city didn't even board it up. Almost like no one wanted to anger it further. That night, Mason returned to the precinct to gather the last of his things. He didn't expect anyone else to be there. But when he opened the locker room door, a faint voice came from down the hall. Not a voice, a bark. Titan didn't react. He was asleep. The bark came again, fainter, from the comms room. Mason's hand went instinctively to his belt, only to remember his gun was in the bag. He walked toward the sound anyway. The precinct was dark, the lights flickering gently overhead. The radio room buzzed like a hive of electricity. It was usually locked after hours, but tonight the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the consoles were alive. Monitors flicker between security footage static and, on one screen, an aerial feed of the motel. Live, room 108 glowed faintly under the moonlight. There was no source of light. It just pulsed. The bark came again from the speakers, then static, then a voice, faint, wavering, familiar. K9 handler Branson, requesting backup. Room 108. Mason's breath caught. The timestamp on the footage was from last night, 2:14 a.m. He reached for the console, switching frequencies. One by one, the monitors blinked through unrelated footage, then stopped on something else. Body cam footage. Someone moving through the motel. Breathing heavy. Camera shaking. Low. K9 growls audible. The screen showed flashes of dark hallways, bloody doors, flickering lights. Then, room 108. The door creaked open. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Mason, or someone who looked exactly like him. Beside him, Titan. Only, the dog's eyes were white, clouded, and the figure, Mason's doppelganger, turned and stared directly at the camera. The feed cut. Every screen went black. The lights in the room surged, then died, and the motel's address printed itself line by line on the thermal printer beside the desk. 108 Ashworth Lane. Room 108. Titan began barking from down the hallway, not at the room, at something behind Mason. Mason turned. No one was there, but the hallway mirror at the far end shimmered, just for a second, as if something had moved through it. Mason closed the comms room door slowly and returned to the locker room. Titan met his eyes. For the first time since that night, the dog stood tall, alert, ready. Mason zipped up his duffel, but this time he slung it over his shoulder. He walked out into the parking lot, the city silent around him, the streetlights casting long, crooked shadows. Titan hopped into the passenger seat, and they drove back to the motel. Back to room 108, not because they wanted to, because it was calling. The air around Ashworth Lane felt different, colder. The trees seemed to lean away from the building, as if trying to escape. Mason parked 2 blocks away. The street was empty, every house dark. Only the motel lights flickered softly in the distance, like dying stars. He and Titan approached on foot. Room 108 stood waiting, its door slightly open, like it had been expecting them. Mason took out a flashlight and shone it inside. Nothing. No blood. No noise. No motion. But the smell returned. The copper stench of fear, of old death and wet fur. Titan stepped in first. No hesitation. Mason followed. Inside, the room was bare. No mirror. No bed. Just walls. Plain. Silent. Then scratching. From the bathroom, Mason slowly opened the door. Inside, a man, hunched over, shirtless, back covered in bruises and cuts. He turned slowly. It was Branson, or what was left of him. His eyes were vacant, mouth moving silently. Behind him, the mirror began to fog, but the room wasn't warm. The fog wasn't natural. It came from within. Branson pointed toward it. Mason stared at the glass. It shimmered. And then, images, dozens of them, all versions of him, different timelines, different decisions. Some versions screamed. Others begged. One pressed his face to the glass and mouthed a word Mason couldn't understand. The last version smiled, and behind him stood the creature, grinning. Mason backed away. Branson's body crumbled into ash. Titan didn't move. He was locked on the mirror. Then, shattering. The mirror cracked, spiderwebbing out from the center. Titan howled. and from the mirror, a hand, charred, human. It reached out, dragging itself forward. The creature, returning. But something was different. Titan lunged, not at the hand, at the wall beside it. The dog's body smashed into the drywall, and behind it, another mirror, hidden. This one didn't reflect anything, just darkness, an absence. Titan growled and looked back, and Mason understood. This was the source, not the hand, not the creature, the mirror within the wall. He grabbed his flare from the bag, one last emergency stick. He lit it and drove it into the center of the hidden mirror. The flame didn't catch. Instead, the mirror began to melt, slowly, like ice under heat. The hand screamed. The creature thrashed, unable to fully enter. The motel groaned. The entire room shook violently. Titan howled again. Mason grabbed his partner and pulled him back toward the door. The walls cracked. From the mirror came a sound like tearing flesh and radio static. Then, explosion, a burst of white, silence, and when Mason opened his eyes, the motel was gone, leveled. Ashworth Lane was a crater. Room 108, erased. Titan stood beside him, still growling, but breathing steady. He looked up at Mason, eyes clear again. The morning light crept over the trees. Police sirens wailed in the distance, and in Mason's pocket, the thermal printer paper from earlier burned itself into ash, as if it had never existed. 2 weeks later, the city condemned the entire block. No structural integrity, the report said. But Mason knew the truth. He never spoke of it again. No one would believe him. Not about the mirror. Not about the motel. Not about what room 108 really was. But sometimes, late at night, Titan would bark at the corner of the room. Always the same one. Always at nothing. And Mason would just sit beside him, listening. Because somewhere beyond the glass of this world, something still watched, still waited. And room 108 was never really gone. Just hiding, waiting for the next soul to remember. Story 2. Code 1013, the silent backup. The first time Officer Nate Holloway heard the static, he thought it was just interference, maybe a loose wire in the patrol car's radio, or leftover buzz from the passing thunderstorm. Nothing unusual, but then it came again, a sharp, sudden burst of white noise, followed by a voice grainy, low, and calm. Unit 301, respond code 1013. Officer needs assistance. Sector 6, mile marker 42. The call wasn't from dispatch. Not his dispatch. Anyway, the voice was too calm. Too old. And there was something in the tone, like it was speaking through time, not space. Nate checked the screen. No active 10 to 13 had been reported. No one from HQ had logged a call. The dispatcher on duty, Rhodes, swore he hadn't sent anything. I didn't even touch the console, he said, sipping stale coffee. And that code's out of use. We stopped using it in the 80s. Still, Nate couldn't shake the chill that crawled up his spine. He was only 6 weeks into the job, the kind of rookie still triple-checking his belt before every shift. But something about that voice, it pulled at him, urged him. So he went. Sector 6 had been long decommissioned, an old industrial zone outside town. Abandoned warehouses, a rusted power grid, and streets no one had cleaned in years. Mile marker 42 led him to an overgrown access road that barely resembled a street. Trees clawed at the sky overhead. The air was thick and damp. That's where he saw it. The cruiser, vintage black and white, chrome trim dulled by decades of grime. It sat under a collapsed billboard that once advertised a burger joint that hadn't existed since the 70s. No one inside, just a rusted police radio still mounted on the dash, and a notebook, half melted from rain but still legible. Nate leaned in through the open window. The notebook had only one line repeated over and over again in shaky cursive. He told me to follow. Then, the radio crackled to life again. Unit 301, Proceed to intersection of Flint and Holloway. Do not deviate. Do not call for backup. Nate froze. Flint and Holloway? That intersection hadn't existed for decades. It had been renamed after the 1978 riots. And Holloway, that was his last name. He backed away, heart pounding. He called HQ, but the line was dead. No signal, no GPS, only static. And the voice, still calm, still giving orders. Unit 301, proceed. We've been waiting for you. That was when Nate realized there was no escaping this call. Not without uncovering what it really meant. Not without answering. Because something had pulled him here, and it wasn't finished yet. Nate couldn't breathe. The static crackled in the car speakers, as if mocking him, urging him to follow the commands. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, staring at the faded directions on the radio. He'd driven down this forgotten stretch of road countless times as a child, but this time, everything felt wrong. The radio hissed again, cutting through the eerie silence that had settled over the car. Unit 301, proceed. Don't stop. Don't ask questions. Nate's throat was dry. His mind raced with the possibilities. He glanced at the notebook again. The words he told him to follow, still lingering on the damp pages. They had been written hastily, desperately. Was this some sort of sick joke? Had someone set this up as a prank? But deep down he knew it wasn't. Something far worse than a prank had begun. He had always been a skeptic. He thought ghosts were nothing but stories, things to tell around campfires or over drinks. But now, with every passing second, the weight of the radio's commands pushed him further into the unknown. This was no longer just a call for backup. This was a pull into a much darker place. Nate had reached the intersection of Flint and Holloway, with a map in his head, and the physical world no longer matched. The street sign, if it could be called that, had long since rusted away, leaving only a jagged piece of metal hanging from a frayed wire. The area was desolate, and the crumbling buildings along the road looked like they had been untouched for decades. Yet, there was an unnatural stillness about it all. Not a single person moved, no car in sight, no lights flickering in any of the buildings. A chill swept through the air, cutting into Nate's skin like a knife. The wind howled in the distance, a mournful sound. He stepped out of the car, leaving the radio on, the crackling static filling the air around him. Nate's boots crunched against the overgrown pavement, his footsteps muffled in the thick fog that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. The abandoned buildings loomed on both sides, their windows dark and empty. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from within those shadows. Unit 301, don't deviate. The voice on the radio sent a jolt through him. He was being pulled further into this nightmare, but it wasn't clear why. Was this some sort of trap? Or was he walking into something much bigger than himself? As he moved deeper into the fog, Nate's mind raced. His training as an officer had prepared him for the worst. Violent criminals, dangerous situations, life-threatening encounters. But this was something he had never prepared for. The air felt thick, as though time itself had slowed to a crawl. The buildings around him began to change. Where there had been empty windows just moments ago, he now saw figures staring out at him. Pale, thin faces that were devoid of expression. They didn't move, but their eyes followed him, unblinking, their gazes like cold iron bars. The sound of their breathing, though silent, seemed to hang in the air. Nate quickly turned away, but the more he tried to escape the feeling, the more it followed him. He couldn't explain it. It was like something was drawing him in, like the very land beneath his feet was alive and conscious. His radio crackled again. Unit 301, you must keep going. We are waiting. The voice was unmistakable now, soft and steady, like the voice of a long-dead dispatcher. It carried an authority that chilled him to core, but something about it was familiar too, as though he had heard that voice before, somewhere in his life. But where? The fog grew denser, swirling around his legs like something alive. Nate's breath quickened, and he found himself stumbling through the mist, his senses assaulted by the disorienting haze. The further he walked, the harder it became to tell where he was going. Suddenly, the fog parted in front of him. A building loomed ahead, an old, forgotten police station. The faded badge on the front door looked like it had been there since the 1950s, worn down by time and neglect. The windows were cracked, the wood around the door warped, and the sign on the front read, Flint Holloway Police Department. Nate froze. He had never heard of a Flint Holloway Police Department. It didn't exist in any records, and yet here it stood as if it had been waiting for him. The voice on the radio crackled again, louder now, as if coming from inside his skull. You are not alone. You never were. Nate's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't move. He wanted to run, to leave this place, but something deep inside him told him that he couldn't, that he had been brought here for a reason. His fingers reached for the door handle, and as his skin brushed the cold metal, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, spinning around. His heart leapt into his throat. There in the fog stood a figure, a man dressed in an old, tattered police uniform, his face obscured by shadows. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to devour the light around him. Nate took a step back. Who are you? The figure didn't respond, but the air around him grew heavier, the temperature plummeting. The fog curled around the figure's legs, twisting and writhing like serpents. You've come too far, the figure finally said, his voice a rasping whisper. You can't undo what's been done. The radio crackled again, louder now, as if trying to drown out the figure's words. Unit 301, come inside. The answers are within. Nate swallowed hard. He didn't know what to do, but something told him that if he didn't enter that building, he would never find his way out. With trembling hands, he pushed open the door, stepping into the darkness beyond. The door creaked shut behind Nate with an ominous groan, and the darkness swallowed him whole. His eyes strained to adjust, but the shadows inside the old police station were impenetrable. The air was thick with dust, stagnant and suffocating. It felt like he had stepped into another time, another world. He reached for his flashlight, flicking it on with trembling hands. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, cracked with paneling, and old filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. Nate swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe old evidence, forgotten files, something to explain this twisted nightmare he was trapped in. But there was nothing here. No clue, no sign of anything, except the overwhelming silence that weighed on him like a 100-pound stone. Suddenly, a sharp click echoed from the darkness ahead, followed by the sound of a door creaking open. Nate froze. Who's there? He called out, his voice barely above a whisper. No answer. But the door at the end of the hallway swung open wider, and the light from the flashlight flickered across the room. It was an office, an old desk, a broken chair, and several dusty file folders scattered across the floor. And then Nate saw it, the figure from outside, the man in the tattered uniform, standing motionless in the doorway, his face still obscured by shadow. His body was unnaturally still, like a mannequin, but there was something about him that made Nate's skin crawl, something wrong in the way he was standing, the way he seemed to fill the room with an unnatural presence. You're here, the figure whispered. His voice was like gravel, rough and cold. You've come to understand. Nate's heart raced. Understand what? He demanded, his voice cracking as he spoke. Who are you? What is this place? The figure stepped forward, and Nate instinctively took a step back, but his legs felt like lead. The man's eyes, hollow, empty pits of blackness, locked onto his with a terrifying intensity. This was where it all started. The corruption, the lies, the deaths, the figure said, his voice low and guttural. But no one ever noticed. No one ever asked the right questions. Nate felt a chill crawl down his spine as the man's words sank in. He didn't understand. He didn't know what this place had to do with the radio call, or the strange things happening to him, but the feeling of being trapped, of being drawn into something dark, was suffocating. You can't change what happened, the figure continued, his voice rising. You're just a pawn like the rest of us, a cog in a machine that was built to hide the truth. Nate took another step back, his breath quickening. What truth? What are you talking about? The figure's lips curled into a twisted smile. The truth about the police that no one wants to face. The truth about the ones who died and the ones who made sure they stayed dead. Before Nate could react, the figure lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him closer. Nate's heart pounded as he struggled to break free, but the man's grip was ironclad. Listen to me, Officer Holloway, the figure hissed, his breath cold against Nate's ear. You're already a part of this. You always have been. Nate's head spun. His mind raced with questions, but no answers came. The man's grip tightened, and for a moment, Nate felt as if he were being crushed under the weight of something far greater than himself. Something old, something terrible. The figure shoved him back into the hallway, causing Nate to stumble. He tried to steady himself, but before he could react, the door at the far end of the hall swung open with a violent crash. A gust of cold wind rushed past him, carrying with it the sound of faint whispers, like voices calling from the past. Nate was forced forward, unable to resist the pull. He couldn't explain it. Someone was guiding him. The radio's voice, the figures in the shadows, the man in the tattered uniform. The whispers grew louder as he walked through the door, and there in the center of the room stood a desk, a vintage dispatcher's console covered in grime. The room was filled with stacks of old paperwork, some yellow with age, others stained with dark, splotchy marks. But it wasn't the desk that caught Nate's attention. It was the radio. The same radio that crackled to life, sending him on this maddening chase. The same radio that had given him the directions, the orders, the one that had been speaking to him from the moment he responded to that code 1013. Nate stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath was shallow, and the air around him felt thicker than ever. The radio crackled again, its eerie hiss filling the room. Then, a voice. Unit 301. Do you hear me? It wasn't the same voice from before. This one was deeper, more unsettling. It sent a wave of nausea through Nate as he stared at the radio, unable to tear his gaze away. You've come this far, but there's no turning back now. Nate reached for the radio, his fingers trembling. He had to know who was behind all of this, who was pulling the strings. As soon as his hand made contact with the receiver, a sharp jolt shot through him, like an electric shock that rattled every bone in his body. His vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin. The static began to hum, louder, faster. Unit 301, welcome to the final transmission. Nate collapsed his knees as the world around him twisted and contorted, the walls of the police station warping like molten metal. The floor beneath him cracked, and the air grew colder still. It felt as if the room itself was alive, breathing, pulling him into its grasp. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Nate heard the voice again. It was calm, cold. You've been marked. Nate's body jerked as the voice crackled in his ears. The words, chilling and cold, reverberated in his mind. You've been marked. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat, the air thickening around him as if it were solidifying. The walls seemed to close in, warping and twisting, the darkness becoming a living entity that threatened to swallow him whole. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat like a drum, as if the very pulse of the building was syncing with his own. The police station, once just an old abandoned building, now felt like something far more sinister. The air was suffocating, a mixture of rot and decay, but something darker lingered, something not of this world. The radio in front of him hissed again, louder this time. The sound was deafening, sending a shock wave through his skull. He could feel the static vibrating his teeth as if the room itself was alive, its walls breathing in tandem with his own breaths. His eyes darted around the room. The dim light from his flashlight flickered wildly, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something or someone moving in the shadows, a figure just out of sight. The silhouette of a man, wearing a uniform too old, too faded to be real. The figure stood motionless in the far corner, his face hidden in darkness. Nate's mind was racing. He needed to focus. He needed answers. He grabbed the radio, trying to steady his shaking hands. His fingers brushed against the cold metal of the receiver, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Time itself held its breath. Unit 301. The voice came again, sharp and clear. Do you understand? Nate's fingers tightened around the radio, his knuckles white. Who are you? He forced out, his voice trembling with fear and desperation. What do you want? The static crackled again, and then the voice, eerily calm, unnervingly familiar, responded. You are part of something much larger than yourself, Officer Holloway. A piece of machine you cannot comprehend. You were always meant to find this place, to uncover the truth. His breath caught in his throat. The words made no sense. How could he have been meant to find this place? What truth was he supposed to uncover? The room seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat from the very foundation of the station. The walls shook, and the air grew colder, more oppressive. The door to the office slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping Nate inside. He spun around, heart racing, eyes wide. The figure in the corner was gone. You were marked the moment you stepped into that car, Officer Holloway. The words echoed in his mind like a mantra, a never-ending whisper. He had been marked. By who? And why? His thoughts were spiraling. His hands trembled as he reached for his gun, instinctively drawing it, as though it could protect him from the unknown horrors he was about to face. But the room was silent now. Still, the only sound was a low hum of the radio, filling the space with tension so thick it was almost tangible. Nate's breath came in shallow gasps as he turned back toward the desk, his eyes landing on the worn-down receiver. The voice spoke again, but this time it was different. The calmness was gone, replaced by an underlying menace that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. You should have stayed away. Officer Holloway, this is the end of your story. The world around him shifted. The room seemed to spin, and the walls began to close in. The corners of his vision blurred. His legs buckled beneath him, and he fell to the floor, the radio slipping from his grasp. His head slammed against the cold concrete, the sharp pain snapping him back to reality. He gasped for breath, his hands trembling as he pushed himself up. His mind was in a haze. The radio had fallen silent. His chest tightened and his thoughts raced. What was happening to him? A loud crash echoed through the room, and Nate whipped his head to the side. A shadow moved at the edge of the room, moving toward him with unnatural speed. A figure, a man, emerged from the darkness. But this time, Nate could see him clearly. It was the same figure he had seen earlier, the man in the tattered uniform. But now, there was something different about him. His face was pale, almost lifeless, his eyes hollow voids of darkness. His lips were twisted into a grotesque grin, and his hands, once human, had transformed into something far more monstrous. Long, bony fingers reached out toward Nate, their sharp tips gleaming in the dim light. The figure's mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, the air filled with the sound of whispers, voices, low and haunting, as if hundreds of souls were speaking all at once. Nate tried to move, tried to get up, but his body refused to obey. It was as if the very floor had become a trap, holding him in place. The air thickened, pressing against his chest, suffocating him. He gasped for air, his throat burning, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, drowning out all other sounds. "You're one of us now," the figure whispered, his voice growing louder, more distorted. "You're a part of the system, just like the others." Nate's vision blurred as his body went numb. His eyes flickered, the world around him warping and twisting. He was trapped in this nightmare. There was no escape. The figure stepped closer, and Nate could feel the icy cold emanating from him, filling the room. His skin crawled. He felt like he was suffocating, drowning in the endless sea of whispers and shadows. And then, just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished, leaving only the sound of his labored breathing. Nate staggered to his feet, panic rising in his chest. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. The room was silent now, but he could still feel the presence of something ancient, something far more powerful than he could comprehend. The radio crackled again. "It's time to finish what you started, Officer Holloway. The truth is waiting." Nate's heart skipped a beat. The radio had spoken again, its voice calm but laced with a dark undertone. He couldn't stay here. He had to leave. He had to find a way out before the station consumed him completely. But as he turned to run, the door slammed shut. A new voice, deep and guttural, filled the air, sending a jolt of terror through his body. "You can't leave. You're already part of this world." Nate's breath caught in his throat, and his pulse skyrocketed. The voice, so ominous, so unrelenting, seemed to echo from every corner of the room, reverberating through the very walls, pushing against his mind like a physical force. He backed away from the door, his heart pounding in his chest as the darkness grew heavier. It was no longer just a physical space closing in on him. It felt like the station itself was alive, a malevolent entity, feeding on his fear. "You can't leave," the voice repeated, this time clearer, more threatening. "You belong to us now." His eyes darted around the room, trying to find an escape, but the shadows twisted unnaturally, the edges of the walls undulating like the surface of a pool disturbed by an unseen hand. The air had grown so thick it felt like it was pressing down on him, suffocating him. Every breath felt like he was inhaling the very essence of the building, a mixture of rot, death, and decay. He could hear it now, too. The whispers. They were everywhere, crawling into his ears, slipping through his mind. Words that made no sense, 1,000 voices speaking at once, overlapping, all of them insistent, pleading, accusing. The sound was maddening. Suddenly, the radio crackled again. Nate's hands were shaking as he reached for it, almost as though he were compelled to do so. The static seemed to cling to the air like a fog, thickening with every passing second. "You can't fight it. You can't stop it." The voice was distorted, guttural, as if something was struggling to break free through the static. "The corruption is in your blood. It was always there. We've been watching you, Officer Holloway." Nate's stomach lurched. He wanted to scream, to throw the radio away, but his body refused to cooperate. The weight of what was happening, the knowledge that he was trapped in something beyond his understanding, gripped him with terrifying force. He thought of the rookie officer he'd been, the dreams he had of making a difference, of righting wrongs. And now he was just another part of the machine, another pawn in a game much larger and more sinister than he could ever have imagined. "You were chosen," the voice continued, its tone mocking, cold. "We needed you. You didn't even know it, but you've been a part of the plan all along." The room seemed to pulse again, this time with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Nate's hands were trembling, his body trembling, as if the very air was vibrating through him. He could barely think, the thoughts in his head swirling together in a chaotic mess, fragments of memories and visions colliding. A flash of a patrol car, his first night on duty, the faces of fellow officers, all of them smiling, unaware of the shadow creeping over them. His first case, his first pursuit, his first encounter with corruption. But that wasn't real, was it? It was all part of the plan. Everything. From the moment he stepped into that old car, he had been marked. The radio had chosen him, and there was no turning back. The whispers grew louder, louder still, until they were all he could hear. His heartbeat, his ragged breath, the static, the voices spoke to him, pulling him deeper into the abyss of the station, into the darkness that now seemed to exist beyond time, beyond reality. He staggered backward, his legs weak beneath him. He didn't know where he was anymore. The walls were changing again, the edges warping and shifting. He saw shadows moving, figures emerging from the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the shadows vanished, leaving nothing but the oppressive silence. Nate's body froze. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, to do anything to escape the nightmare he was trapped in, but his legs wouldn't move. He was paralyzed by fear, by the realization that he wasn't alone in the station. There were things here, things that had always been here, hidden in the crevices of time and space, waiting for someone like him to stumble into their web. The radio crackled again, and Nate's heart skipped a beat as the voice returned, this time softer, almost tender. "We've been waiting for you to see it, Officer Holloway." The walls began to tremble as the words reverberated through the air. The whispers turned into laughter, deep, guttural laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Nate's skin crawled, every nerve on fire as the horror of it all settled into him. The station wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a place of work. It was alive, and it had a purpose that he had unknowingly become a part of. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. His breath became visible, the cold air biting at his skin. His body shook violently as the shadows began to take shape again, forming into figures, officers, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. They were trapped, just like him, caught in the web of the station's malevolent will. And then, standing in the center of the room, was the figure from before, the officer in the tattered uniform, his face still hidden in darkness, his grin wider now, as if pleased with the terror that had spread through Nate. Nate wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His throat was dry, the fear choking him from the inside. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. "It's over now, Officer Holloway." The figure's voice was low and raspy, like the last breath of a dying man. "You've been chosen. You belong to the station now." Nate's mind raced, but his body was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. The figure stepped forward, the shadows clinging to him like a cloak. It was as if the very darkness had become part of him, feeding off the fear that radiated from Nate. "There's no escaping now," the figure whispered, its voice a cold caress. "This is your home now, and you will never leave." The whispers grew louder again, and Nate felt his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of his own voice, or what was left of it, whispering the words he never thought he'd say. "I'm a part of this." Story 3. The Graveyard Shift Files. He had buried the badge, locked the uniform away in a dusty box in the attic, vowing never to wear it again. Sergeant Harold Harry Dawes had done his 25 years in blue, and by the time he walked out of the precinct for the last time, he swore he'd leave the ghost behind with it. But ghosts have a way of following you home, especially the ones that never made it into the reports. The tapes arrived 2 weeks after the funeral. No note. No return address, just a worn cardboard box on his front porch, sealed with brittle yellowing tape and stained by time. Written in thick black marker across the top were 5 simple words that made the old sergeant's blood run cold. "Do not review alone, 1981 to 1987. Inside, nestled like a crypt of secrets, were 12 cassette tapes, each labeled by date and shift time. He recognized the handwriting. It was unmistakable. Tight cursive that always slanted too far to the right. Tommy Briggs, his old partner, dead 20 years. Harry sat on his couch with the box in his lap, staring at it for hours. Memories clawed their way back, of night shift that never ended, dispatch calls that made your skin crawl, and long, Silent drives past the edge of town where the fog never lifted. And Tommy had been the only one who saw what Harry refused to admit, that some shift should never be remembered. But curiosity, no, duty had a weight of its own. That night, long after the house settled into silence and the neighborhood drifted into slumber, Harry dusted off his old cassette deck and popped in the first tape. He made sure the curtains were drawn, locked the door twice, turned on every lamp in the room. The tape clicked, static hissed, then came Tommy's voice. March 3rd, 1982, Graveyard Shift, Unit 103, Dawes and Briggs. We received a 10 to 96 call, possible mental disturbance at the old Ridgeway Church on Highway 6. Caller claimed he saw a man digging up a grave behind the chapel. Harry froze. He remembered that night, except in his memory. They never made it to the church. They were rerouted, or so he was told. The tape crackled again. Footsteps, doors creaking. Then Tommy's voice again, more frantic. I can see someone. He's not digging. He's standing still, facing away from us. Dawes is trying to talk to him now, but wait! He's not responding. Something's not right with his shadow. It's not moving like the others. Harry's breath caught in his throat. A chill crawled up his spine. He didn't remember any of this. He reached for the pause button, but the tape kept playing. Tommy's voice turned to whispers, then static. Then came the unmistakable sound of screaming, twisted, garbled, inhuman. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Harry yanked the tape out and hurled it across the room. The player ejected with a wheeze. He was trembling, his heart racing. It felt like someone had turned the thermostat to freezing. But the worst part? From the corner of the room, barely audible over the hum of the fridge, a whisper. Ridgeway, you never came back. Harry barely slept that night when the whisper echoed in his living room. His instinct kicked in, the same one that kept him alive for 2.5 decades on the force. He swept the house, room by room, gun drawn, flashlight beams slicing the dark like a sword. Nothing, no intruder, no signs of forced entry, just a faint scent of mildew and dust and the cold. In the morning, he told himself it was a trick of the mind. Old age, maybe, the result of listening to trauma stored on plastic decades old. But the moment he tossed the tape into the trash bin outside, he saw it, the same black patrol cruiser from the 1980s, parked halfway down the street. Dusty, cracked windshield. No plates, just sitting there, idling quietly. When he approached, it vanished. That night, against his better judgment, he played the second tape. April 9th, 1983. Night shift, Officers Briggs and Dawes. Location, Monroe Apartments, Unit 5B. Caller reports loud cries from a neighboring unit, possibly domestic violence. No prior history. The tape began with footsteps climbing stairs, then a knock, then silence. Tommy's voice again. We're hearing a baby crying. No response from the door. Dawes is prepping for forced entry. Harry's stomach flipped. He didn't remember a baby. Didn't remember going inside. Didn't remember anything. The next sound was a door creaking open, followed by a wet, slithering noise. Briggs whispered, Jesus, Harry, the walls are moving. Harry stopped the tape. He couldn't do it. Not that night. Not alone. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat on the porch, watching the street, listening for the sound of an old engine or distant sirens. But the night remained quiet until he went back inside and saw muddy footprints in his hallway, barefoot, small, child-sized, and trailing into his bedroom. He didn't sleep at all. The next morning, a strange envelope appeared at his doorstep. No address, just a cassette, no label. He didn't recognize the voice on this one. Sergeant Dawes, you've opened the files. Now they'll open you. Click, then static. Harry tried everything, burning the tapes, smashing the player. But each morning the box would be back, tapes rewound, stacked neatly, like someone or something was making sure he finished what it started. One night, After his coffee pot turned itself on at exactly 3:13 a.m. and his front door opened with no one there, he decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to go back to the source, the precinct. The old station had been shut down a decade ago, moved into a newer, safer, better-lit facility downtown. But the original one still stood like a forgotten mausoleum at the edge of town, surrounded by weeds and boarded-up windows. It smelled of rot and paper and old sweat. Harry broke in easily. The key still worked. Inside, everything was frozen in time. Desks covered in dust. Locker doors ajar. Chalkboards still bore old names. He found his own locker, number 17. Inside his nameplate, a photo of his wife, and a folder he didn't remember ever filing. Inside were reports, dozens of them, each matching the dates on the tapes, each marked redacted, each missing signatures. His signature. He turned the pages, feeling his throat close. These were his calls, his shifts, but the events they described weren't in his memory. Names of missing officers, locations of incidents that never reached the public, details that defied logic. One in particular stood out. June 5th, 1984, Ridgeway Church. Sergeant Dawes never returned from the call. Declared missing. Partner reported psychological breakdown. Dawes later found home, unaware of any event. But that didn't make sense. He never went missing, right? He staggered back, clutching the folder, and heard something down the hallway. A soft metallic click, like a radio turning on. He followed it deeper into the station, into the old evidence locker room. That's where he found the door. It hadn't been there before. Wooden, carved with strange symbols. No knob, just a slot in the middle, shaped like a cassette tape. He didn't want to, but he already had the tape, the one with no label. He inserted it. The door groaned open. Beyond was a staircase descending into pitch black. The temperature dropped. A whisper floated up the stairs. "Come finish the shift, Harry." He took a step, then another, until the light from the station above vanished, and the only sound left was his own breathing and the hiss of a radio crackling to life somewhere far below. Harry's boots echoed against the narrow concrete stairs, each step deeper into coldness that didn't feel natural. This wasn't the kind of chill that came from lack of sunlight or damp stone. It was the kind that crept into your bones, that whisper at the back of your neck like something watching, waiting. He reached the bottom, where a narrow corridor stretched before him, walls of peeling paint and rusted pipes, buzzing with low static, as if the whole hallway were alive with radio signals bleeding through time. Ahead, a red emergency light pulsed slowly, and beneath it, the outline of an old dispatch room. He stepped in. The room was exactly as he remembered it from 1984, the year he was declared missing. Rows of dusty radios, pegboards with missing officer badges, filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in decades. But at the center of the room sat a single functioning console with a red light blinking. He reached for the receiver, hesitating, and then picked it up. It clicked. Then came the voice. Unit 103, Officer Briggs reporting. "Do you copy?" Harry's knees buckled. That voice, it was Tommy's. Younger, clearer, not warped by time. The same voice from the tapes. He responded. "Tommy? Is that you? Where are you?" Static. Then, "Still on shift, Sarge. Still waiting for you to back me up. They never let me clock out." Harry gritted his teeth. "Where are you? What is this place?" Another pause. Then the voice said, "They call it Red Zone. Once you enter, you're stuck on loop. We're all still working. Sarge." All the ones from the tapes. "You've heard us, felt us. This is where the lost ones go. The ones who answered calls that shouldn't exist." The floor groaned. Harry turned. From the darkness, figures began to appear. Men and women in old police uniforms, their badges tarnished, their eyes hollow. Some held radios. Others had bullet wounds. One officer had no jaw, yet his radio kept crackling from his chest. They weren't alive, but they weren't dead either. They were recordings, memories caught between the reels of time, cursed to repeat the worst nights of their lives, forever. Harry backed up, heart pounding. "I didn't know. I didn't remember." Tommy's voice grew colder. "You didn't want to. You chose to forget. You made it out, and you locked us away. Buried the tapes. ignored the calls. But the shift never ends, Harry. You clocked in the moment you press play. Suddenly, the room twisted, walls warping, radios screaming in different voices. The lights flickered violently, then silence, and the sound of final tape ejecting itself from the console. Harry stared at it, black, unlabeled, still warm, with trembling hands. He picked it up. The voices behind him whispered in unison. Play it. Finish the report. He inserted it into the console. His own voice began to play. Until the tapes came back. Now he was here, surrounded by the forgotten, the silenced, the ones who didn't make it out. And they weren't letting him go. The console burst into flame, the radio screaming in agony, the dispatch room collapsing inward like a dying star. Harry turned, sprinting for the stairwell, but the stairs were gone. Just a hallway of tape reels, stretching into endless darkness, each reel labeled with names he'd seen on gravestones. He stumbled, fell, reached for the only light in the distance, a door marked final shift, his only way out. Behind him, the voices screamed, "Don't leave, U.S. You're one of U.S. You finished the report." But he reached the door, opened it, and stepped through. He woke in his living room, covered in sweat. The box of tapes was gone. The room was warm, normal. Bright sunlight filtered through the blinds. Birds chirped. For a moment, he thought it was all a dream, until the phone rang. He picked it up. Static, then a voice. Unit 103. Officer Dawes. We have a 10 to 96 call at Ridgeway Church. Do you copy? He dropped the phone. On his coffee table sat a brand new tape. This one labeled tomorrow. The clock read 3:13 a.m. Harry sat motionless in his living room, staring at the tape labeled tomorrow. He hadn't moved in hours. The house was quiet, unnaturally quiet. Not a single creak of wood, not a whisper of wind outside, not even a hum of the refrigerator. It felt like the world had stopped spinning, like reality itself was holding its breath. The tape sat on the coffee table, untouched, but Harry could feel it. It wasn't just plastic and magnetic ribbon anymore. It was an invitation, a warning, a sentence. He picked it up, feeling the weight of it, not just physically, but in his soul. He knew what would happen if he played it. The others hadn't been hallucinations. They weren't just recordings. They were doorways, each one pulling him further into that other world, the one beneath the precinct, the one filled with voices of forgotten. And this one? This was a final shift. He walked to the cassette player, slid the tape in, and pressed play. No intro, no date, no officer ID, just silence. Then his own voice. Day 0. No badge. No call sign. Just me. Dawes. I've crossed over. I'm reporting from the other side of the shift. The sound warped, stretching into a distorted scream that wasn't quite human. A sound like hundreds of radios all tuning into the same dying frequency at once. Then a new voice, familiar, cold, calm. We've been waiting for you, Sergeant. The station needs a new supervisor. The lights went out, not just in the house, in the neighborhood, maybe the whole town. Darkness swallowed everything. From outside, a siren began to wail, but not the usual high-pitched whine of a cruiser. This was older, deeper, the wail of a 1960s model patrol unit. And it wasn't approaching from a distance. It was rising from the basement. That's when Harry realized something that turned his blood to ice. He didn't have a basement, but he did now. He turned slowly. Behind him, in the hallway where the wall had always been, was now a wooden staircase leading down. Carved into the wall above it, Graveyard shift records, level 0. He didn't hesitate this time. Not because he was brave. Because he knew there was no going back. He took the first step down. The temperature dropped. The air thickened. The wailing siren grew louder. At the bottom, the room stretched in impossible directions. Hallways upon hallways. Doorways to nowhere. Filing cabinets piled on the ceiling. Floors made of badge numbers. Walls made of old uniform fabric. It was a world stitched together from memories, trauma, and duty. In the center stood a massive dispatch console, and behind it a man wearing Harry's old uniform, with Harry's face, but younger, empty-eyed, waiting. Sergeant Dawes, it said, voice echoing from every wall. Clock in. Harry stepped forward. What is this place? He whispered. The doppelganger smiled. This is where every shift ends, and where the next one begins. A mirror to eternity. Behind the figure, glass walls revealed endless footage. Officers patrolling hallways that no longer existed. Responding to calls that never ended. Crying out for help in static-laced screams. Every time someone listens, it said, they pull us forward. Every memory becomes a doorway. You opened them all. You brought us back. And now you're staying. Harry clenched his fists. No, I'm not part of this. I made it out. I lived. You forgot. The voice boomed. You erased us. You let us rot. The console lit up. Tapes began to roll. His own voice played back. Fearful, desperate. All the shifts he'd buried. All the screams he'd tried to drown with liquor and sleep. You started this, the figure said. Now finish it. It stepped aside, revealing a chair, a badge, and a console waiting to be manned. Harry shook his head. I won't. The ground split beneath him, a black chasm filled with screams and sirens. He staggered forward, catching himself on the edge of the console. From every corner of the room, the lost officers began to appear, ghostly silhouettes in old uniforms, badges gleaming like broken promises. They spoke in unison. Finish the shift. The console screen flickered once, then showed a single prompt. Begin new record. Harry looked at the chair, then at the faces around him. Briggs, Lenny, Porter, all gone, all remembered, all stuck. He swallowed the lump in his throat and sat down. His hands moved on their own, pressing play, pressing record. One last time. The console glowed beneath Harry's trembling fingers, a cold green light blinking steadily like a pulse. Around him, the dispatch room breathed, walls humming, radios twitching with whispers of voices long since silenced. Begin new record. He stared at the screen, then down at the microphone in front of him, and for the first time in decades, he spoke the words he had never dared to say. Sergeant Harold Dawes, reporting, final shift. Logging audio from all previous files. The voices, the lost officers, they're not gone. They're not dead. They're here, still working, still waiting. A second console screen came alive, playing snippets of static-written voices from old tapes. Unit 211, requesting backup they've taken Mac. Dispatch, something's in the cruiser. It's in here with me. I don't see any streetlights. I don't see anything. One by one. Each voice stitched itself into the air until the room was a chorus of unfinished transmissions. Why are you doing this to me? Harry whispered. The younger version of himself, standing silently in the shadows, now stepped forward, slowly changing, his face shifting from Harry's into something hollow, a mask of what once was, a man-shaped echo. Because you were supposed to be here, it said, voice mechanical and human all at once. You were the last to leave. You were the one who remembered. I didn't remember. Harry snapped. Not until it was too late. And yet here you are. The dispatch board flared, sending waves of blue light across the ceiling. Suddenly, all the ghosts, every officer whose voice had haunted the tapes, appeared in the room. Their faces were clearer now. Some young, some old, all worn out. They didn't look at Harry. They just watched the console, waiting. "Is there any way out?" he asked the ghost that wore his younger face. "No," it said simply, "but there's still something you can do." Harry turned to the microphone again. "My name is Sergeant Dawes," he said, "and if you're hearing this, then the graveyard shift has reached you. I don't know if you're safe. I don't know if any of us ever were. But we answered the call, and the calls never stopped. We were forgotten, buried under budget cuts and closed cases. But we were here. We are here." He paused. A deep crack echoed in the distance. The building shook slightly, like something huge was moving beneath it. Harry gripped the edge of the desk. "We've been broadcasting from beneath your feet, from your basements, your abandoned stations. Every night you dream, you tune in just a little. Every time you hear a voice in the static, that's us. Every time you see red and blue lights where no car should be, that's us." He leaned closer to the mic. "And if you hear this, run. Turn it off. Don't answer the next call. Don't investigate the weird hum. Don't listen to the dispatch channel after midnight. And whatever you do, don't play the next tape." The recording light on the console blinked red, then turned green. "File save. Graveyard_shift_final tap." And then silence. The console powered down. The figures around him froze. The room went dark, except for one final message flashing on the console screen. "Would you like to sign out?" "Yes." "No." Harry hovered over the button. If he pressed yes, what would that mean? Oblivion? Release? Or would it just start again? But no meant staying. A permanent seat at the haunted desk. A life spent between transmissions. He exhaled, then pressed yes. A sudden explosion of light blinded him, like a flood lamp turned on in his skull. The building groaned, every wall shaking violently. The radios burst into flames, tapes unraveling midair, ghostly silhouettes screaming in protest. But Harry stood still, unblinking, unafraid. He felt himself rising, not physically but spiritually. His body left behind like an empty coat on a chair. The graveyard shift let go, and for the first time in years, he felt light, warm, free. When morning came, sunlight poured through the broken blinds of his house. The coffee table was empty. The cassette player was gone. And the air was just air. No static, no echoes, no whispers. Later that afternoon, Officer Tyler Jensen, fresh out of the academy, received a package at his precinct. No return address. Inside, a dusty shoebox. Inside that box, a single cassette tape labeled "Do Not Review Alone." He laughed. Old guys and their jokes. He popped it in. Play. Static. Then a voice. "My name is Sergeant Dawes. If you're hearing this." And so, the graveyard shift began again. Story 4. The Basement Cell. There's a thing about old buildings. They never really forget. And the Harrisville Police Station, with its chipped tiles and creaking floorboards, was a structure that remembered far too much. It started on a Wednesday. Not that the day mattered. Days didn't mean much on the late shift, especially in a town like Harrisville. Population small, crime smaller. The worst they got was the occasional drunk brawl or a teen spray painting the high school mascot. Nothing more. Nothing real. But that Wednesday, something was different. Renovation crews had been sent in to modernize the building, install better wiring, reinforce the foundations, maybe even update the break room microwave that still smelled like popcorn from 1997. Officers joked about it, said the place needed an exorcism more than a facelift. Most laughed. Some didn't. It was Officer Kyle Rankin who first found it. He wasn't even looking for anything, just following the low, steady hum of a pipe that shouldn't have been humming. He traced it down to the lowest level of the station, where the air grew cooler, heavier. He ended up at the far end of the evidence lockup. A brick wall stared back at him, coated in decades of grime. But there was something odd about it. A rectangular seemed just faintly visible beneath the dirt. A doorway. He knocked once, joking to himself. It knocked back 3 times, slow, heavy, like knuckles against a coffin lid. They called the site supervisor, tore the wall open by noon. Behind it, a staircase leading down into darkness. No lights, no wiring, just concrete, cold and silent. And at the bottom, a room, a cell, the kind with thick iron bars and a single bench. In the back wall, someone had scratched into stone, locked for a reason. But that wasn't the worst part. The cell wasn't on any blueprint. Not in the town archives, not in the station's original floor plans, not even in the handwritten logs from the 1800s when the building had first gone up. According to every record, that space didn't exist. The sheriff ordered a camera installed down there. Standard surveillance feed, night vision, motion sensor, audio pickup. They watched it for 3 days. The first 2, nothing happened. Dust floated through the frame like underwater plankton. No movement, no sound. But on the 3rd night, the feed flickered, and someone appeared in the cell. A man, middle-aged, dressed in a police uniform, outdated, with tarnished buttons and a badge that hadn't been worn in over 70 years. He just stood there, silent, looking directly into the camera. No one had entered the cell. No alarms had triggered. The doors were locked. Yet there he was. Dispatch pulled old riot records from the archives. July 1952. An inmate protest gone wrong. A fire. 3 officers killed in the chaos. 2 inmates unaccounted for. And 1 name circled in red ink. Deputy Clarence Gorman, listed as presumed dead. Last seen in the basement wing, trying to secure an unidentified suspect. But Gorman's body was never recovered. Some say he got caught in the collapse. Others say he killed the inmates and ran. And a few whispered something worse, that Gorman never left the basement, that he was locked in for a reason. Within a week, the knock started. Officers working night shift reported hearing them, soft at first, almost like settling pipes, then louder, always in threes, always coming from the floor beneath their feet. Then, one by one, officers began to vanish. No struggle, no signs of forced entry. Their patrol cars left idling, radio silent. And every time, every single time, it was preceded by the same thing, a knock beneath the floorboards. Now no one goes down there. The cell is sealed again. The feed is off. But late at night, if you're in the station, you might still hear it. 3 knocks, like a question. And if you knock back, you may not come back up. Rain tapped against the high windows of the Harrisville police station, soft and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something just waking up. The storm outside had cast the entire town in shades of gray. Street lamps flickered and died. Power lines hummed like taut nerves stretched too far. Inside, Sergeant Tom Heller stood by the break room, staring blankly at the floor vent. He'd heard it again. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. Exactly like the others described before they disappeared. He hadn't told anyone yet, but last night, when the station emptied out, he stayed behind. Curiosity had a way of peeling back even the most disciplined minds. At 2:13 a.m., he'd gone down into the basement alone. The hallway leading to the sealed-off area was cold. Not the kind of cold you could warm up from. A deeper chill, the kind that burrowed into the back of your teeth. The bricks around the old evidence lockup were still stained with dust and soot from the renovation. Everything past that section had been condemned after the cell discovery, sealed off with reinforced steel and a dozen city-issued warnings. Tom had memorized the code to override the security. He told himself it was about closure, truth, but deep down, he knew it was something else entirely. Compulsion. He passed the first gate and entered the old corridor. His flashlight struggled, flickering as if the batteries were dying, though they were fresh out of package. The deeper he went, the more the air thickened, like walking through fog, only invisible. Breathing became harder, thoughts heavier. At the stairwell, leading down to forgotten cell, Tom paused. The hairs on his arms rose before he even stepped forward. The silence down there wasn't natural. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of something listening. Still he descended. Each step moaned beneath his boots. The metal railing was ice cold. As he reached the final landing, the cell came into view. Iron bars rusted brown. Inside, a narrow bench. A scratched message still visible on the back wall. Locked for a reason. He stood before the cell. Empty. No ghost. No figure. No Deputy Clarence Gorman staring through the camera like in the footage. Just shadows. Tom raised his flashlight. Its beam hit the far wall and froze, because now there was something else scratched beneath the original warning. Fainter. Jagged. You unlocked it, and that's when the door behind him slammed shut. The basement cell had no lock from the inside. The steel door leading out had automatically closed with a weight sensor, something designed during renovations to prevent trespassers from entering the condemned area. But now it worked in reverse. It was trapping him in. Tom hammered against the door, yelling. His radio crackled but gave nothing but static. And then, over the static, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." He spun around. The flashlight flickered again, and this time, something stood behind the bars. The figure wore an old police uniform, tarnished, faded, a hole in the chest where something had once pierced the fabric. The face was empty. Not blank, empty, as if a mask had been stretched too thin over nothing. It grinned, then vanished. Tom backed away, hand trembling over his holstered weapon. From the far end of the hallway, footsteps, soft, bare, not one pair, multiple, and the whispers began. Dozens of them, some pleading, some sobbing, others laughing. He turned toward the stairs and saw them, officers, half a dozen, all dressed in uniforms from different decades, some missing half their face, others burned, melted, their mouths fused shut. They stood on the steps, watching him in silence. Each one of them had vanished from the station over the last 3 months. One reached forward and knocked once on the concrete wall beside him. Then again, then a third time. Tom didn't wait. He ran past them, pushing through cold air that felt like electricity and illness. Up the stairs, into the main hallway. The walls pulsed with decay. Mold patterns shifted like fingerprints. Light bulbs burst as he passed. He reached the second-level stairwell, gasping, and found the next horror waiting. Officer Niles, missing 3 weeks ago. He stood at the top, smiling blankly. His eyes were gone, just voids, skin stretched too tight, mouth slightly ajar like a doll someone forgot to finish building. Niles didn't move, but the whisper came from behind him. You unlocked it. Tom shoved past him. No resistance. Niles didn't even flinch. He emerged into the squad room, breath heaving. But the station had changed. Desks were overturned. Blood smeared the walls in looping, nonsensical patterns. Radios buzzed with ancient police codes long retired. Windows were bricked up. The hallway stretched farther than it should have. And on every screen, every monitor, played the basement cell surveillance feed, looping, one frame over and over. Deputy Clarence Gorman staring directly at the camera, expression dead, until in one frame, he smiled and blinked. Elsewhere in town, Officer Jenna Cole drove through the storm, her knuckles white around the wheel. She hadn't heard from Tom in hours. Dispatch wasn't responding. Her gut twisted with dread. The last message she received was from his phone, a short, glitchy voice note. Basement, it's not a cell, it's a door. She floored the gas. By the time she arrived, the station was in total darkness. Her flashlight cut through the black, sweeping over paper-strewn floors, overturned furniture, shattered glass. but no sign of anyone. And then she heard it. 3 knocks from beneath the break room floor. She drew her gun and followed the sound. Through the hallway, past the security door, down the stairs. The air was wrong, like walking underwater, only drier, dustier, like inhaling ancient skin. She reached the basement cell. Empty, bars wide open. Inside, a trail of boot prints leading back into the corner and disappearing into the wall. She whispered, "Tom?" Silence. Then, behind her, footsteps. She turned, expecting, hoping. It was Tom, standing at the base of the stairs, pale, eyes distant. "Tom, are you okay?" He didn't answer. She took a step forward and saw his hand. It was wrong. Too many joints, skin bending like it had no bone beneath it. And he whispered, "It's open now," before the flashlight exploded in her hand. The room was pitch black. Jenna's flashlight had shattered in her hand like it hit a wall of invisible pressure. Her palm bled, the sting sharp and immediate, grounding her in the terror that had now fully swallowed the station. She backed toward the stairs, each step trembling beneath her. But Tom, if that was still Tom, didn't move. His head slowly tilted aside, like a child trying to understand a strange sound. In the dark, she could barely make out his silhouette, but something shifted in the air around him. It shimmered, pulsed like heat waves, only there was no warmth, just the steady hum of something unnatural breathing in the walls. She took another step up, and then he spoke. But it wasn't his voice. It was layered. Tom's, yes, but under it, something older, something guttural and cracked with time. "You let it out." Jenna didn't answer. She bolted up the stairs, gripping the railing with her cut hand, smearing blood across the metal. Behind her, no footsteps, no chase, only whispers, dozens of voices bleeding through the walls, calling her name like children mocking from the dark. "Jenna." She reached the main floor and stopped. The layout had changed. She stood in the same hallway she'd entered through, but now it stretched endlessly. Lights buzzed above, flickering in synchronized rhythm. Each flick, one step closer. The station changed shape. Where there once were doors, now stood only walls. Where there were exits, now only loops. She turned in a full circle. No exit, no entrance. And from down the corridor, Tom's voice, calling softly. "Come back." She ran, through endless hallways that should have led to dispatch, to the locker room, to the exit, but none of them did. They folded in on themselves like a maze made by a mad architect. The floors dipped at odd angles, walls squeezed tighter with each turn. Jenna skidded to a stop when she entered the squad room again. Third time now. Each time it looked worse. This time, every monitor blinked in unison. The same footage played over and over. The basement cell, empty, then suddenly filled with a figure hunched in the corner. It stood, turned, smiled. It was her, on every screen. She stepped back, and something touched her shoulder. She spun around, gun raised. Nothing there. Then the whispers shifted. Now they weren't calling her name. They were laughing. A childish, mocking laughter, echoing from vents, from outlets, from behind posters on the wall. She grabbed the closest phone and dialed out. Static, tried her radio. Nothing but clicks, like a switch being turned on and off, over and over. Then a voice. "Do you see now?" The basement camera on the screen shifted. The feed glitched. Now the cell wasn't empty. Now Tom was inside, not standing, crouched, facing the corner, scratching the words "locked for a reason" into the wall with his fingernail. She screamed into the monitor across the room. Glass exploded outward, and the station screamed back. Not a noise, not really. It was pressure. Every wall groaned at once, and the air grew heavy with the scent of rot and rust and mildew-covered leather. The building pulsed, and then everything went silent, truly silent. Not a whisper, not a hum, not a creak of shifting floorboards. Jenna stood completely alone in the dead center of the squad room, unable to breathe, and that's when she saw it. On the far wall, something written in blood. Some door should stay buried. The blood was fresh, still dripping, and beneath it, the floor had changed. A trapdoor, wooden, unmarked. It hadn't been there before, not even in the blueprints. She dropped to one knee, pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. She stood, hesitating, but something in her mind whispered, "You have to know." She opened it. Stairs descended into darkness, not the basement. This was deeper, below the station's original foundation, below the dirt, the earth. She climbed down, one creaking step at a time. The air was cold, stale, older than the town. She reached a narrow corridor. The walls were fleshy, not quite stone, not quite dirt, breathing. Somehow, the corridor was alive. She continued, gun raised, as she turned the final bend. Light, not electric. Lanterns, dozens of them. In the center of the room, a table. Upon it, old police files, photos, tapes. She stepped closer. Her name, written in black ink on one folder. Inside, photos of her standing outside the station. Today, 10 minutes ago, and another, tomorrow, dead. She slammed it shut. Then she noticed the others. Every folder bore a name of an officer who had gone missing. And the last file, Clarence Gorman, the man who died in 1952. She opened it. Inside, 2 photos. One, him in full uniform, grinning. Second, the basement cell, empty, and a note handwritten on the back. If you see him, run. He's not the first. She heard movement behind her, spun around. Tom, but not Tom. Whatever was wearing him had begun to change. His face stretched, jaw distending. His skin flaking like old paint. His eyes rolled white. Arms lengthened unnaturally. He opened his mouth. Time to go, Jenna. The lights blew out. Jenna fired. The shot lit the tunnel for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see what Tom had become. Not just stretched or twisted. Not human anymore. His face had dissolved into a smear of something sticky and dark, eyes like marbles sinking in hot tar. But the bullet didn't hit. It passed through him, right through, and struck the far wall with sharp ping. She turned and ran, the narrow corridor scraping her shoulders as she stumbled through it. The sound of something slick dragging along the floor followed behind. Not running, just slithering. Whatever had taken Tom knew she couldn't escape. Not through the front doors, not through the radio, not through logic or planning or training. The deeper she went, the more the world around her changed. The corridor opened into a massive underground room, impossible in size, larger than the building above it. A cathedral of decay. Walls made of rusted cell bars welded together into jagged teeth. The ceiling held up by pillars of bone and rusted weapons. In the center, a cage. Inside it, Clarence Gorman. He sat hunched, just as in the footage, rocking. But this was no ghost. He looked up, eyes sharp, alive. He opened his mouth, and Jenna's ears rang with a scream that wasn't sound but a frequency, one that shook her teeth and made her bones ache. The figure behind her, the Tom thing, stopped at the edge of the room. It wouldn't come in. Gorman stood slowly, and as he moved, the air changed again. The smell of mildew turned to the stench of rot. The metal groaned like it was weeping. "You should not be here," he rasped. Jenna raised her weapon again. "Who are you?" He grinned. "Not who. What?" He stepped through the cage bars like they weren't there. Jenna backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls closed in, pulsing, like lungs exhaling decay. "This place remembers pain," he said, voice like gravel soaked in blood. "It was built on screams, fed on them. I just opened the door." Her voice cracked. "Why?" Gorman tilted his head. Because I died down here, forgotten, buried under their justice. So now I make them remember. Jenna tried to step around him, but with every movement, the room shifted, like a maze reacting to fear. Her path turned to bars. Her steps landed in ankle-deep water, black and warm. He kept speaking, a sermon of madness. They built this station on my bones, covered it with law. But justice doesn't erase blood. It only buries it. Now it rises. From the corners of the room, figures appeared. Officers, dead ones, their faces bloated, skin blackened, uniforms shredded. Every officer who had vanished. She recognized them all. And at their center, Chief Halvorson, his eyes gone, his mouth stitched shut. Gorman reached out and placed a hand on Jenna's shoulder. It burned, not like fire, like ice that scalded from inside. Visions exploded in her mind. The 1952 riot. Gorman locked alone, beaten, left to rot. Then the walls whispering to him, giving him promises, a deal. Let the pain linger and live forever in the space between. He'd said yes. And the station became the tomb. Every knock on the floorboards, a warning, not from him, from those trying to keep him in. Her vision cleared, and the others, those officers around her, they weren't trapped souls. They were hosts, vessels. Each new officer taken, a body for the darkness to wear. And now it wanted her too. Gorman smiled wider. Join us, Sergeant Jenna. We're the badge that bleeds. Her voice shook. I'm not yours. She reached into her vest, pulled out the tape recorder, the one she'd found earlier, still miraculously running. She clicked it on, and Gorman hissed. The voices of the past poured out. Pain, panic, radio transmissions from decades ago. Every tape labeled "Do Not Review" alone now screamed back at the source. The station remembered, and it didn't like being reminded. The walls cracked. Screams rose from every direction. The officers began to convulse, shivering as if waking from a long nightmare. And Gorman? He bled from the ears. Turn OFF, he shrieked. But Jenna turned it louder. The room cracked open, pieces falling from the ceiling, light flooding in from impossible places. And then the floor collapsed. She fell. Down, down. She hit the ground hard. Not cement, not stone. Something softer. It gave beneath her like skin. She stood slowly, feeling bruised and dizzy. The recorder still clutched in her hand. Everything was dark. No walls, no ceiling. Only a black void stretching forever, yet still wrapped in the stench of mildew and rusted metal. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Not just one set, hundreds. She turned and saw the officers again. All of them. But something had changed. Their faces no longer looked twisted, no longer bloated or broken. They were scared, awake, conscious, and each one whispered her name. Jenna, get out. A low groan rippled to the void like a heartbeat beneath the ground. From the shadows, the thing that had been Gorman emerged. His human form had collapsed, replaced by something far more ancient, massive, shifting, a body stitched together from shadows and old uniforms. Faces formed and dissolved along his surface, screaming, always screaming. He towered over them, his arms dragging across the floor like wet chains. I buried them, keep the past quiet, it said, voice layered with 1,000 tongues. Now you've made it loud again. Jenna backed away. There's no escaping this place, she whispered. And then, from behind the crowd, someone stepped forward. It was Halvorson, still blind, still stitched, But his hand reached for Jenna's, and in his other, his badge. He pressed it to her palm. Then he turned, faced the creature, and walked toward it. One step, then another, and with each step, the others followed. Officer after officer, badge after badge, facing what had buried them, bound them. They walked into the thing, not with violence, not with rage, but with memory. The creature howled, unraveling. It tried to pull away, but the weight of every voice it had silenced held it down. Jenna raised the recorder again. The last tape inside clicked. It was her voice, from just earlier that night. I don't think this place wants to be found. As the tape played, the creature convulsed, its form flickering like static. Then it began to burn, not with fire, but with light. White, clean light that poured out from the center of the room like a flood. Jenna shielded her eyes. The noise stopped. Everything stopped. And when she opened her eyes, she was back. The station hallway. Cold. Empty. The recorder in her hand. Smoke curling out of it. She stood slowly. Everything around her looked normal, except the basement door no longer existed. Just a wall where it had once been. She stumbled out into the front lobby. Morning light cut through the glass. Outside, officers gathered. Search parties, news crews, confused civilians. She looked down. Halvorson's badge still in her hand. Her phone buzzed. The time read 7:52 a.m. She had been missing for 3 days. Later, when they reviewed the tapes, Jenna's own body camera footage, it was all there. The cell, the figures, Gorman. But none of the officers could agree on what they saw. Some heard whispers. Others saw nothing but black static. And the footage ended the moment she fell. The official report said she suffered a breakdown during the renovation inspections. But every night since, just before bed, she hears it, knocking from beneath the floorboards. 3 knocks, always 3, and then silence. But she doesn't investigate anymore. She just closes her eyes, clutches the badge, and waits for morning.